that matter. And today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about a little bit more about the salah. And let me pull up my slideshow. Uh, if we could just go ahead and share screen. Just give me 1 second there. It says, all right. Okay, we need to share screen here. And okay. All right. We're having some difficulty putting the share screen. No problem. I have my. We need to have the host here. Give me the ability to share screen. And we start off in alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursalin nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man ittaba'a bi ihsan ila yawm ad-din. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us in this gathering today and to inshallah increase everybody in knowledge. And inshallah, let's go ahead and share the screen now. Okay. All right, we're continuing where we left off. We talked about this last week. Preconditions. Okay, and the week before last, which was the first week, we started talking about this. We kind of quickly went over this. Today, we're gonna just kind of go quickly over it, and more specifically, we're gonna bring some of the proofs for this, inshallah. So let's continue the preconditions. Okay, so some people call this the preconditions or the conditions of the prayer, right? And it's something that comes before the prayer. If you don't have this, your prayer is not accepted at all. So you need to have fulfilled these things here. Excuse me. So the first one is that one has to be, 1 second, is it this one? That in the Iqamah, okay? The precondition sequence by custom intention by man. Let's go. This is still about the adhan here. It's okay. So we ended off last time talking about the time and the preconditions for validity, that one needs to have an intention, the purity for hadath. 1 second here, calling the adhan right here. Newborn baby. All right, okay. Let's start off right here. I believe we continue up from here. We're still talking about the adhan, excuse me. And it says, calling the adhan in the right ear of a newborn is recommended as the iqamah to the left. I just want to point out there, I know we mentioned it last week, but about this sunnah here. Some scholars have weakened the hadith, but it is the custom of the majority of scholars that this is a practice that is to call the adhan in the hadith, even though the hadith may have some weakness, but alhamdulillah, that's not a problem. It is permissible to exit the masjid after. Okay, let's get to this here. This point right here. The point before that says it is permissible to exit the masjid after it. It is impermissible to exit the masjid without the adhan, without an excuse or intention to return. Now this is this is the disputed matter. Some scholars say once the adhan is called that you can leave, and some say that you cannot leave. And we're taking the position here that one should not leave the masjid. One cannot unless one has an excuse. So if you have some sort of valid excuse, you shouldn't just leave the masjid after the adhan is being called. You should not leave the masjid once the adhan is being called. You know, as we said, some scholars they look at this issue as being one where even if you don't have an excuse, it wouldn't be an issue. But one should also keep in mind that the shaitan, there's a hadith, the shaitan, when the adhan is being called, he likes to run away. So this is not one of the action befitting a believer to just leave the masjid at that point in time. Okay, and we have here خروج من المسجد بعده حرم خروج المسجد بعده. And regarding the hadith of the baby, we just want to mention the hadith that the we have the hadith of, excuse me, no, I'm sorry, leaving the masjid. For the one leaving the masjid, it's based on the hadith that the hadith of Sha'asa'i, he said we were sitting in the masjid with Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and then the mu'adhin called the prayer. And then a man stood up in the masjid and he started to walk. And so Abu Hurairah started to follow him. And he was looking at him, and so he left the masjid. And then Abu Hurairah said, certainly this man has disobeyed Abu Qasim sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning he has disobeyed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is another name for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And then we ended off here with talking about calling the adhan in the ear of the baby. And it says here that the hadith is on Abu Rafi'. He said that anhu, he said, I saw the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam giving the adhan in the ear of Al-Hasan ibn Ali radiallahu anhuma. That is Al-Hasan ibn Ali radiallahu anhuma, when he was born. And on the day that Fatima gave birth to him with the salat. So this hadith is reported in two places, Ahmed and Abu Dawud. Right, and then we have another hadith by Ibn Abbas that the Prophet ﷺ gave adhan in the ear of Al-Hasan ibn Ali. It's a very similar hadith, on the day in which he was born, and he called the adhan in his right ear and the iqama in the left ear. So the first hadith didn't mention the iqama, but the second narration does mention the iqama, and this one is mentioned by Al-Bayhaqi in his Shu'ab al-Iman, but he said it's da'if. And as we said, some scholars say it's da'if, that one. But as we said, alhamdulillah, this is the practice of many of the scholars. They've encouraged this, and so even though there was no specific hadith that we could say that's authentic. But anyway, let's go to the next one here, the adhan. Okay, so we're moving on. And as I said, we're going on to the issue now. And I just want to briefly speak about this. The preconditions. As I was mentioning before in the beginning, we have what is called shurut in Arabic. And some scholars, some people, they translate that as conditions, or I like to say preconditions because they become before the prayer. Right? Excuse me. And so we have, let's see. First we have, so let's talk about these four matters first, which is on the top: the preconditions, the pillars, the obligations, and the recommendations. So there are things that are the pillars, which are inside the prayer. Then if someone purposely leaves it, their prayer is not accepted. So these are very important things for us to look into and to pay attention to and to take heed to. And then we have things which are obligations to the prayer that if one does not. So the pillar is someone, if they purposely leave it, their prayer is not accepted. If they mistakenly leave it, right? They mistakenly forgot to do one of these, their prayer is also not accepted. So they would if they're in a certain rak'ah, certain unit of prayer, they would have to go ahead and make that up. And then we have the obligations. Pay close attention, because the obligation is very similar. Just like we said with the pillars, if someone intentionally leaves that off, it says if somebody intentionally leaves that off, then their prayer won't be accepted. However, if someone mistakenly leaves off, they can make it up with the sajdat as-sahw by doing the prostration of forgetfulness. All right, let's continue with the recommendations. There's many things that are recommended in a prayer. There's many, and you're going to see in a little while the certain amount, and we're just going to get into a few of those. There's some that have to do with sayings and some which have to do with actions in the prayer. And so let's go back now. Once, as I said in the first class, we went over these, but now we're going to look at it, go through it with the slide, and talk about a little bit about the proofs for these. So the condition for the validity of prayer are 6. Right? There are 6 conditions for the validity of prayer. The first one is purity from hadath. Right? And we mentioned this before, and we mean by there is that the person has they're made a ghusl, they've made a wudu, and the proof for that is the Prophet Muhammad. It comes from Abu Hurairah, who said that the Prophet Muhammad said, لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. That Allah does not accept from any of you the prayer of any of you, if he has ritual impurity until he makes the wudu, until he makes that ritual, that minor ritual purity. So this shows us here, and this is in Bukhari and Muslim, the two most authentic books in the Ummah. And so this shows us that you must have that. Some have described it as a miftahu salat, right? As the key to salah. So you must have this even before the prayer. And that's the first one here, right? The purity from hadath, and hadath here being ritual impurity. So you've done something to break your wudu, something to invalidate your wudu. For example, passing gas, using the bathroom, urinating or defecating, something to that effect. So that would break your wudu. You need to have purity from that. So in other words, you need to be in a state of purity, because that is actually a state. And it's not really related to you being clean per se, physically clean. But we're going to get to that. That's another one mentioned here. So the second one is the entrance of the time, right? And we mentioned before the hadith of, or we're going to mention right now. Excuse me. We'll bring you the ayah right here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا, which means observe the prayer from the decline of the sun until the darkness of the night, and the dawn prayer. For certainly the dawn prayer, meaning the fajr, the early morning prayer, is witnessed by angels. Right, and we'll show you that verse right there. Okay, sorry about that. There's the verse right there. That's in, if anybody wants to look that up, that's in Surah Isra, which is the 17th Surah of the Quran, and the verse is number 78. Okay, so that is the proof that we use for that, as to why does the prayer have to be in dukhul al-waqt? Right? إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا. Right? That the salat has come in at prescribed times. So one cannot, for example, prayer comes in at exactly 5 o'clock, a certain prayer. Let's say Fajr comes at 5 a.m. You cannot pray at 4:58. This is a condition. So it now makes that obligation, you're now liable for that obligation. Once it hits 5 o'clock and the prayer has come in, you now have to pray. So you cannot pray before that time. And you should not pray after. If you happen to pray after that time, you have to that's called qada. You're making up the prayer. And you will be sinning if you do that, unless you have some sort of excuse, something held you up that you absolutely couldn't pray. There was, maybe you didn't have wudu, there's no water, you were, I don't know, something very out there. So anyway, let's go to the next one, concealment of the aura. And we spoke about that last time as well. And we're just going to mention a proof for that this time, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Ya bani Adam khudu zinatakum inda kulli masjid, which means, oh, the children of Adam, take a zina, which means your decorative clothing, at every place of prayer. Now that is in Surah Al-A'raf, which I believe is the 7th Surah of the Quran, and the verse is 31. So that shows you that you need to be in a good state. When someone's going into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so they're going to make sure that they have certain areas of their body covered. For the male, and we spoke a little bit in detail, but we're going to quickly go over that, is from your knee up into your navel, right, where the belly button is. So he needs to have that covered, as well as having at least one of his shoulders covered. That's for the male. And then for the female, she needs to have all of her body covered, including the feet. And that's a little bit debated, but anyway, we're going to go with saying that that's the feet. And her face can be, it's mustahab, it's preferred for her to have her face uncovered, as long as there are no foreign men, people that are men that are not related to her. And the hands have to be covered as well, according to some scholars. And some scholars, majority of scholars say that the hands do not have to be covered. So, and those scholars that say that the hands have to be covered, some of them give the fatwa that the women are allowed to have them uncovered, and that was the Hanbali madhab is the one that says that the hands have to be covered, and they give the fatwa. The scholars in Asham Duma, which I've heard from one of my teachers in Syria, that they give that fatwa, and the scholars of Saudi Arabia who also follow the Hanbali madhab, they say that they give the fatwa that the woman can have them uncovered. Okay, so that's the proof for that. We also have a hadith reported from Aisha radiallahu anha, لا يقبل الله صلاة حائض إلا بخمار, which means Allah doesn't accept the prayer of any woman who has reached the age of menstruation, right? A female or a woman has reached the age of menstruation, except with a khimar, right? Except with some sort of a covering her body when she prays. And that hadith is reported in Ahmed, Abu Dawud, and Tirmidhi, and Ibn Majah. And the great scholar Ibn Abu Umar, Ibn Abdul Barr, the great scholar from Lisbona, from Lisbon in Al-Andalus, in Islamic Spain and Portugal at that time, which is now called Portugal. He said, أجمع على فساد الصلاة من ترك ثوبه وقادر على استتار به وصلى عريانا. He said that the scholars have consensus. There's a consensus of the scholars that have unanimously agreed about the prayer being invalidated for the one who leaves off praying in a garment and he or she is able to cover themselves, right? So here we have two proofs, and so the men, and we could discuss other proofs, but we're just giving one or two proofs for each one. The man is from the knees to navel, and he has to have at least one arm covered, and that is wajib for him. And then the woman needs to have from the, as we stated already, we spoke about that. And then let's talk about the children, right? So someone who has not reached puberty, they simply, at 7, as we spoke about before, the child is ordered to do the prayer. And it's obligation for the parent, the obligation is on the parent, not the child, on the parent to tell them to go pray, right? Whether they do it or not, it's not obligated on them per se. The obligation is for us to tell them, us on the parents. So at that age from 7 until they reach puberty, which could be 9 for females, 10 for males or older, up to about 15. Before they reach puberty, all they need to cover is their private parts, okay, their private area. So in other words, if a young girl doesn't have a hijab on, her prayer will be accepted, inshallah. So we want to talk about that. That's number 3. Let us continue. Avoidance of impurity. As you said, many of them were mentioned before, but we're discussing a little bit more details today. And we're talking about number 4 here, which is avoidance of impurities, right? The najasat. It's for someone to make sure that before we talked about, and there's a difference between this one and number 2, the hadath, that is a ritual impurity. This one is the actual impurity, the actual physical impurity. So the impurities, like for example, feces, human feces, for example, or urine or something to that effect, right? So and things of that matter, perhaps blood. So these things, one must make sure they don't have that on their body in 3 places. On their body, right? On the place of prayer. So in those places, they need to make sure that they don't have any or on their body, their clothing. I forgot clothing as well. So body, clothing, and the place of prayer. So the actual place where they put their head, their hands, their knees, and feet, that place right there has to be clear of any impurities, right? So one needs to make sure. And what's the proof for that? We have from the Quran in Surah Al-Muddathir, which is one of the earliest verses revealed in during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his prophethood. And that is the 4th verse, which says, right? Purify. So Allah ordered the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in his ayah for him to purify his clothing. So that is the proof for that there. And we have the hadith of Anas, anhu, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, تنزهوا من البول فإن عامة عذاب القبر منه, which means stay away from, make sure you stay away from urine, because it is generally the punishment of the grave from it. Someone is generally punished from the grave because of it or from it. And that is reported in Daraqutni. So one needs to be very careful of this. We have, hadith of a man who the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ put down a twig on his grave, and it said, what was he punished for? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said it wasn't for a major sin; it was for a minor sin. And the thing is that they would ask, what is this? And he was saying that the man was not careful about getting urine on himself. So one needs to be very careful when you're in the bathroom, getting a drop or something and being very negligent. No, you need to be very careful. Make sure that you remove everything and making sure you don't have anything on your body, on your clothing, or on the place that you're praying. Right? And that's I want to mention now, this is a very important issue, because we see some people sometimes saying, we don't know, maybe, especially living in the West or something, you might be in the park, and say, we don't know, maybe a dog, passed some urine here, urinated or something. We don't know. We go by what we know. If you're not certain, our deen is based upon, in these matters, what we're certain of. All right. So if you have a doubt right now, you're not certain that a dog, for example, urinated on that spot. You don't have any proof for that. So we go back to we leave what we're certain of, what we're certain of for that which we have doubt of. So that doubt means nothing right now, unless we have proof. We could go up with a million scenarios of people, what if that, what if this, what if that, and that actually is a type of get into a type of sickness, waswas, compulsive behavior, obsessive and compulsive behavior. So let us keep that in mind. I wanted to bring that up at this point now. The next one, which is number 5 there, which is facing the Qibla. And facing the Qibla means facing, if you're right in the Haram, you have to face exactly at the Kaaba, right? And then if you're outside of the Masjid al-Haram, the masjid, and it kind of, the further and further you get away, like let's say if you're in New Jersey or wherever in North America, you just have to reach Mecca. So, it gets more precise as you get closer to the place where the Kaaba is, the Masjid al-Haram. Right? So, and we have a proof for that from Surah Al-Baqarah, which is the second surah of the Quran, the surah of the cow, which is 144. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ, which means one should face towards the direction of Al-Masjid al-Haram, towards the sanctuary. One should face the direction of the sacred house, the sacred sanctuary, Masjid al-Haram. So that's a proof we have for that. Right? And this actually is a matter which is considered ijma'. It's an issue which the scholars have not disagreed about. There's a consensus on that matter. And let's see, we could, and the one who said that was Ibn Hazm, the great Andalusi scholar. Ibn Hazm, he mentioned this. He was from Cordoba. Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, rahimahullah. And the next one is intention. And I believe we mentioned the proof for that before. We'll quickly mention again the hadith of Umar ibn Khattab radhiyallahu anhu, that he said that the Prophet Muhammad said, "Innamal a'malu bin-niyat," that certainly actions are only by their intentions. Certainly actions are by their intention. And the place of the intention is in the heart, right? It is in the heart. That is where it originates. That is where it is the most relevant place, right? And as I heard from one sheikh the other day, he said the intention is ruh al-amal. It is the soul of the action. So And so that is where it's at. And one should not say it out loud. One can say that intention to themselves quietly, silently, that they're intending to pray. Uh, they can, but that means nothing if it's not in the heart. So the main place is in the heart. And as long as one is certain about what they're intending, that they're praying a certain specific salah, that they know they're praying dhuhr right now, and that they're intending to pray dhuhr, right? And then there's another matter too. If you're leading the salah, you should intend also. If you're leading the salah, if you're being led in salah, you're intending. That's an additional intention about if you whether you're three states, and we want to talk about this now. We're going to get into a little bit later. In regards to the salah, you're either leading the salah, right? That's called the imam. You're either being led in salah. There's a term for that too. It's called the ma'mum. And then you're either praying by yourself, right? So there's three different states in regards to this matter where everybody falls into one of these categories, right? So you should have the intention that you're either leading, being led, or praying by yourself, right? And that hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. We've done 6. Now let's go on. Good. Okay, we're going into the next matter now. Facing the good. So we're getting to the next matter here. Let's see. So we talked about, and these are all for validity, and the intention, as we said, is the heart. And the reality is a resolution to do something which is, sorry about that, which is not abolished in any situation. Good. And the conditions are Islam, sanity, and discernment. What is that talking about? You're going to see this repetitive when we're talking about, and we talked about that also with the adhan. This is a very important matter, is that, there's preconditions for things. One of them is Islam. So one has to be a Muslim for the prayer, right? That's the first thing. So, and we talked last week about the hadith that the Prophet Muhammad sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen, and he told them to tell the people to bear witness that there's nothing worthy of worship except Allah. And if they obey you in that, then tell them that Allah has made upon them obligatory 5 prayers in the day and night, right? So this was the order of things. Maybe somebody comes to prayer, they might come to Jummah, they're taking Shahada. It's very important to get that person maybe to do Shahada before the prayer, and then after the prayer, and if they've taken the Shahada, to make a ghusl and to pray and do prayer. So it's very important for the person to become a Muslim first and to take the Shahada. Someone may want to do it and pray, alhamdulillah, but there's an order to things. If that's what they feel they want to pray, I mean, we can't stop somebody. Hey, you want to pray, in the way the Muslim prays. But, as far as the conditions of being accepted, as a Muslim, we need to make sure we intend do it in this order. Sanity. So the next thing is sanity. We need to make sure that someone has their brain, their faculties, their mental faculties in place, because as we said before, we said last week, this is related to the intention, and that's what we're talking about here on the 6th. So this is someone's intention. Someone whose mental faculties there, they cannot have an intention, right? They're not able to establish some sort of intention, right? So that's why this needs to be established that they're saying they have their mental faculties in place. And then the third one, and we spoke about this last week as well, discernment, meaning that someone has reached the age of discernment. And we mentioned last week that we're saying that that's the age of 7 lunar years, once again, and not solar years. And what's the last one here? Its time is at the onset of worship or just before it. Okay, so when do you have to establish that intention? Let's say, you get in your car, you have an intention in your from your home, and then you just kind of go in your car and you drive to the masjid, and you didn't have the intention, or you stop. Let's say you stopped at a store on the way, and then you go to the masjid, and you had the intention all the way back, let's say 20 minutes ago, out of your house. And we're saying here that it needs to be on the onset of worship, right at the time that you're ready to pray. You got to have that intention, just right at that time, right? As saying Allahu Akbar, and or just before that. So slightly before, let's say a few seconds before that, they're calling Iqama, and you have intention in your heart. And so some scholars maybe take it a little bit more. I know one scholar, he told me that this intention could be, let's say if they're going straight to the masjid, as the scenario I gave you just slightly before I changed it. I said you stopped at the store. So some scholars said, let's say he goes straight to the masjid. He's walking to the mosque. It's 5 minutes away, and nothing disturbed him. He went straight there. So some scholars kind of widen that a little bit, but we're kind of be on the safe side and say there it's on the onset of worship and just before the worship. Okay, let's go to the next one here. And we're gonna time here. We have all right. We'll probably we're probably gonna just cover a few of these. We have 14 of them, and once again, just to repeat, the pillars of prayer, right? Pillars of prayer. These are things, as we said before, if someone intentionally leaves them, then their prayer is not accepted. Or that rak'ah, they have to do the rak'ah. Or they mistakenly leave it. Excuse me, that's the whole prayer. If they mistakenly leave it, they would have to make that up, that rak'ah, right? So we cannot. These are not things to play with. These are things that they're called pillars. Some of the scholars, they call it as pillars because so you cannot stand, like a building cannot stand without a pillar. So also the prayer, just like we talk about 5 pillars of Islam, there's no Islam without prayer, without hadith. These things are pillars of Islam. You cannot, you need shahada, for example. So similarly, the pillars of the prayer, we have 14 of them, and some scholars number this a different way. That's not a big problem. So let's start off with the first one here. القسم الأول أركان الصلاة 14 قيام بالفرض. So we start with the first one, which is standing in. And what we're going to do probably next week, we'll probably finish these off, and we'll go through the whole prayer from beginning to end. Right now, we're just talking about, we're just kind of breaking it up in a an easy categorical way, and then maybe next week or the week after, what we'll do is we'll just break it up by right now we're breaking up in terms of what's the most important things in the prayer, what's before the prayer, in the prayer, also in the prayer, and then the recommended things, right? So that's, as you said before, the prerequisites. Then we're talking about the pillars, and then we're going to talk about things that are an obligation, and then the recommended things. And then we'll probably just talk about the prayer from beginning to end, from A to Z. All right, so that might be next week or the week after. So the first thing, as we said, was the rukn, and as opposed to the wajib, the obligation, that if we do it intentionally, it shares with this. If you intentionally leave it, your prayer is not accepted. But if you mistakenly, not this one, the obligation, if you mistakenly miss it, your prayer can be made up with the 2 prostrations of forgetfulness, sujood sahw. So qiyam ala al-fard, standing in an obligatory prayer. This is a very important thing, and this is with the capability. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُمُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us, stand, right, to Allah with devotion. And this is in Surah Al-Baqarah, 238, right? And it's by the hadith of Imran radiallahu anhu that he said, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, صَلِّ قَائِمًا فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ فَقَائِدًا فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ فَعَلَى جَنْبٍ. And that's in Bukhari, which means pray standing, and if one cannot, then sitting. and or if you cannot, then sitting, and if you cannot, then on your side. So this is the first thing, is standing in an obligatory prayer. So if someone cannot stand, let's say they're very sick, very ill, and perhaps they get dizzy or headache or something like that, it'll increase their sickness, or or something to that effect. They're allowed to sit. Okay, as the hadith says here. Let's keep this in mind though. But let's say somebody's leg, we might see this sometimes. Somebody's leg, there's a problem. Let's say, I don't know, while they're making sujud or something like that, right? When they're putting their head down on the ground, but they have no problem just standing up. So if they're able to stand up, they might have some sickness in some other part of the prayer. They have to stand up. That person has to stand up. And even if there's some fear, I remember seeing a sister before, she was praying in her car. So you have to keep this in mind. You have to be standing. If you have some fear, you go to a masjid or go to a place that you maybe feel safer or something like that. But you cannot do it outside of its time. The prayer has to be done in its time. Inna salata kanat ala mu'minina kitaban mawquta. Certainly prayer has been prescribed at specific times. So we have here that one. We have the hadith. We brought to the ayah. And then the second one here is the opening takbir. Right? So someone has to be standing. Oh, and I want to mention also about the standing. Sometimes some people come to the masjid, right? And we see somebody in the bowing position, in the ruku'. So as we can see, the order of things is one has to be standing first. So you cannot just come into prayer and go right into ruku'. You have to be standing first. So when you stand up, right? And this goes to number 2, the opening takbir. I should have actually mentioned after this, but I'll mention it now. You have to do the opening takbir. The takbir is saying Allahu Akbar. So if someone is in the opening position, they cannot just say Allahu Akbar and just go straight into a bowing position. They have to stand and say Allahu Akbar, then go into the bowing position. Okay, so and they could say it again a second time. One time is obligatory, and the second time will be sunnah. So here, and that brings us to number 2 here, the opening takbir. One has to say Allahu Akbar. And be careful if someone is praying behind an imam, because you cannot complete that statement Allahu Akbar before the imam completes his statement. The imam has to say Allahu Akbar, then you say Allahu Akbar. Okay, perhaps you start just at the same time or in the middle of him saying that, but you have to end after he ends. You cannot end before him. Okay, so one has to say Allahu Akbar, which of course means Allah is the greatest. Allah is the greatest. You have to say that in the Arabic language to the best of your ability, to say Allahu Akbar. Okay, so you cannot say it in another language. That has to be said in the Arabic language. Reciting of Al-Fatiha. Reciting Al-Fatiha. This is the third one. لا يقبل صلاة أحدكم من أحد. Hold on, we have the hadith here of the Fatiha, which is the opening chapter of the Quran, right? We find that at the very beginning of the Quran, which is called Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. And this too is a rukn. Once again, you cannot intentionally leave this, right? And it is a rukn, or it is a pillar in every single rak'ah. For the imam and for the person who is praying by themselves. As we said, there's 3 states. You're either leading the salah, you're an imam, you're either being led in salah, right? Or you're praying by yourself. So out of these 3, this is an obligation upon 2 of them. That is the imam, right? And the person praying by themselves. This is by the majority of scholars who say this. That is the Hanafis, the Malikis, and the Hanbalis are the majority. And the Shafi'i say you must, every single person must say it, right? So we're saying here, we take the position that one has to take, the one leading and the one praying by themselves has to. It's a must for them to say it, right? And the person being led in prayer, it is, there's some scholars differ. We're going ahead with saying that it is preferred for the one being led. It's not obligatory, but it's preferred for them to recite it as well, right? In the sakatat, in the times of silence, in the silent times, and maybe the imam between prayer and stuff like that. So if the imam is reciting Fatiha or after he's completed Fatiha, and sometimes they give you a space between the two prayers, but you shouldn't pray at the same time, or you shouldn't be saying it at the same time as him. All right. And this is a hadith I was thinking about this before I got distracted, and it says لا صلاة لمن لم يقرأ بفاتحة الكتاب, which means there is no prayer for the one who does not recite the opening book, the opening prayer of the book, right, of the Quran. This is an authentic hadith. It's in Bukhari and Muslim, so keep that in mind. Very important matter. I just want to mention also for the new Muslims, you know, we should say things like Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, wa la ilaha illallah. That would suffice. And this is something one needs to very quickly get on as soon as they become Muslim, is trying to memorize this. You know, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't burn a soul more than he can bear. So, you know, someone might be new to Islam and they're not able to, you know, recite so precisely, but they need to try their best to quickly try to learn this and recite in Arabic to the best of their ability, right? So in the meantime, while they're learning it, they can go ahead and say things as soon as someone the same day become Muslim can start saying Allahu Akbar, la Alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, Subhanallah, wa la Alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah. They could say this in their prayer in this time of Al-Fatiha. So let's get to the next one, which is bowing, which in Arabic is called ruku'. For those of you that know the word, ruku', which is going in a bowing state, right? To be in the bowing in Islam is like your equivalent or you're equal to the floor. You know, you're parallel. Excuse me, the word I'm looking for is parallel to the floor. And it's not like the bowing like you see like in the Eastern tradition. You know, in Asia and stuff like that, they bow, partially bow. It's not that type of a bow, but it's a full bow. And that is by consensus of the scholars. Let's get into that. What is considered the bow? All right, let's get into that. At what point will you be considered? Because the sunnah, as we said, is being parallel to the floor. But at what point will you? There's two things now. What's the sunnah and what is being that you've done it, you've done the bare minimum. You have to at least have your hands touching the knees, right? So that might be a little bit less than that. And that as well, you know, these things, maybe you have some extreme back pain or something, you're not allowed to do that. You try your best. Maybe you have to sit down at that point or something, or maybe you're able to go down enough so that the hands do reach the knees. That will be enough, inshallah. So you have to be in that position. We're talking now and saying, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Subhana Rabbil Azim. That is not a pillar, though. We're going to get into that. That will be an obligation. So we're going to get into that one. But as far as what's the pillar, it is being in that position, right? And that's number 4. And what's the proof for that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ruka'u. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "O you who believe, bow, do bowing." Right? And that's in Surah Al-Hajj, ayah 77. And also from the hadith, there's a hadith about a man who made some mistakes, a Sahabi, right? And they call and he made some mistakes in his prayer, right? And the Prophet Muhammad told him, go back and do your prayer again. He said, go back and do your prayer again, for you have not prayed. So in other words, he was doing, you know, certain things that he thought he was acceptable, but the Prophet Muhammad said it was not acceptable. So he told him to go back, and he taught him, you got to do this and you got to do that. And one of the things that he told him was, حتى تطمئن راكعة, which means then do the bowing until you're in a resting place in the bow. So in other words, don't do it so quickly. Don't just go in and out of it, right? Okay, so that's, and some say, what's the distance of that time? You have to be in a state where you're not moving. You kind of stopped, even if that's a small amount of time. Good. Okay, let's continue now. Number 5, ورفع منه, which is number 5, raising from it. So now that you've gone into the bowing, it's a pillar as well to rise from that bowing. And in other words, going back into a state of standing again, going once again into the standing position that you came from before you were in the bowing, right? That as well is a pillar of the prayer. And that is also mentioned in that same hadith of that Sahabi who was making some mistakes in his prayer, and the Prophet Muhammad corrected him. He told him also, the Prophet Muhammad told him, ثم ارفع حتى تعتدل قائما. He said, then raise, come up from that position until you are straight. You're standing in a straight position, right? So that there is the 5th pillar of the prayer. Let's get to the next one, number 6. 6, which is straightness. I'tidal. And that is also coming from the hadith, the same one we just mentioned. So there's 2 things that have to be going on. I'tidal, which means going up from it and then being straight in that position. Standing up straight, not slouching, not you're not kind of halfway between the bow and halfway standing. No, you have to be straight, standing up straight. Good. And then the 7th one, which is prostration, right? The sujood. This is the next thing. One needs to go from that standing position now, going down. And like I said, I'm not talking about every single detail from A to Z. We're going to get into that in another lesson. We're just talking about what is a pillar right now. Okay, sujood. And that's by consensus of all the scholars. One needs to go down from that standing, that someone's standing, then bowing, now standing again. From that standing, going down now into prostration, going into sujood. And that is by consensus of the scholars. And that is also, the proof for that is also the prayer of the gentleman, the Sahabi, radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, who made some mistakes in his prayer. And it was said, Prophet Muhammad told him, ثُمَّ اسْجُدْ حَتَّى تَطْمَئِنَّ سَاجِدًا. He told him, then make prostration until you are in a tranquil state, prostrating. So he has to go from there down until one is stopped in tranquil state. You're not moving, not in the middle of moving, but in a tranquil state, making sajda. So we'll talk about what needs to be covered now then, right? What is the prostration about? What does that entail? Right? And we have a hadith for that, actually, which it says, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَسْجُدَ عَلَى سَبْعَةِ أَعْظُمٍ على الجبهة وأشار بيده إلى أنفه ويديه والركبتين وأطراف القدمين, which means the Prophet Muhammad said, I have been ordered. So who ordered him? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him. He said, I have been ordered to prostrate upon 7 body parts, 7 bones. And they are upon the jubha, upon the head, right? The jubha is the forehead. And he actually pointed with his hand to his nose. So it's, and actually this is one bone, it's considered one bone. So one has to have their nose as well as their forehead touching the floor, right? That is what is required from them. That is what is required from them. And they must have their 2 hands touching the floor. And they must have their 2 knees touching the floor. And they must have the edges of their feet, in other words, like their toes touching the floor. So that's 7 body parts. So 1, 2, 3, the knees, 4, 5, the 2 feet, the toes, 6, 7. So that will be the 7 body parts. That is what is required of you. And that hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. Let's see, وَرَفْعٌ مِنْهُ. And we'll go, let's see, how many more minutes we have? We have 14 here. So we talked about straightness, raising. We'll probably finish this slide here, and then let's see, we'll probably continue next week with the rest. That's what we'll do, inshallah. All right. So let's continue. Prostration, rising from. Okay, the rising from that sujood position, from that prostration position. Now you have to rise up, right? And then sitting. These goes together. And then sitting. So the actual rising and the sitting now. Sitting in a being in a sitting position. We'll talk about those two together because they go together, right? So we're going to stand up for that. And then the sitting between the two prostrations. And that also comes from the hadith of the gentleman, the Sahabi radiallahu anhu, who was making some mistakes in the prayer. The Prophet Muhammad told him, ثُمَّ اجْلِسْ حَتَّى تَطْمَئِنَّ جَالِسًا. He told him, then you must sit until you're in a tranquil sitting position. So one must come up and stop at least the moment of time was sufficient that they are considered to be tranquil, right? And that is the 9th pillar of the prayer. Let's see. All right, we have let's see. We have 10. Oh, I think we could finish this. Let's just let's just finish these right here, and then we're gonna start next week with the wajibat. I have enough time here. So the 10th one, which is الطمأنينة في فعل من الأفعال المذكورة. Okay, so one needs to be in a tranquil action. We talked about this in certain, going from one movement to the other movement. One has to stop and be in some sort of a tranquil movement. They cannot just be in a continuous movement. Going from standing, bowing, standing again, then prostration, then sitting. No, one has to stop and be in a tranquil state at each position, right? Which is defined as stillness, even if short. So it's pretty simple. A couple of seconds it might be just to be still in that position, not in some continuous motion. And that's what that's all about. And that's also coming from the hadith of the Sahabi who was corrected and told to redo his prayer. The Prophet Muhammad told him. And there's an interesting point here, is that Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said that ruku', which is the bowing, and the sujood, which is the prostration, in the Arabic, in the language of the Arabs, is not known except that one is in a stationary position in every single, position. So even by definition, this is what one has to be in these positions. Okay, let's continue. We have the 11th one here, the final tashahhud. Okay, we're going to talk about the first tashahhud. The tashahhud is, when we're sitting at the end of the second unit, rak'ah, and also at the last unit of the prayer, right? The first one is not considered a pillar. We're going to get to it. But the last one, you cannot intentionally or mistakenly miss it. The last one. And the tashahhud. And that's the 11th one. and that is due to the hadith where was recorded by Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu that the Prophet, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إذا قعد أحدكم في الصلاة فلتقل التحيات لله. So we have different narrations, right, as far as what was said in the salah, but so we had there's different narrations. التحيات لله. So this one right here is one that which is actually, you know, sitting, not just sitting, but also you have to say certain things in this particular position. So keep that in mind. And this is something, what is it sitting for? And the two salams. So this goes together with actually 11 and 12 go together. Sitting for it and the two salams. So that sitting position, you know, doing that final tashahhud, if any of you sits in salah, then let him say at-tahiyyatu lillahi. That's Muslim. And ila akhiri, to the end of what we're going to say. And we're going to get into that in about a minute, as far as what is to be said exactly. And this is very important, especially for those people who are new Muslims. We have to memorize this and know what has to be said in the Arabic language. Okay, so we have here, and we have it right here, what is said there in English. I'm just here it is. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa rukun minhu. So we have this. So the tashahhud al-akhir, which is a sit, and also we have to do that sitting, and the two salams. So we have to end with saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And some scholars, some of the Malikis, they said that you can just do one. But we're taking the position here that you have to do two. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Right? The pillar of which is, and inside, so we want to mention this too. Okay, that itself has a pillar within itself. Right? And that's saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So someone has to say that. That is the bare minimum. And we have some of the hadith that say, you know, some more wordy. But as far as what's required, the bare minimum requirement is just to say that Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, which means in English, of course, we're going to say in Arabic, oh Allah, send your praise upon Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? After which is sufficient of the first tashahhud, which is, and that's the translation of which we're going to say it in Arabic too. التحيات لله سلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله. Excuse me. سلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله سلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. Which means in Arabic, in English, excuse me, the translation of which is, all greetings are for Allah, peace be upon you, O Prophet, and the mercy of Allah, peace be upon us and upon Allah's righteous servants. I bear witness that there is not a deity, or there's no deity worthy of worship but Allah, or except Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. That's what that means, right? But we should be saying this in Arabic and try to memorize this. And if anybody needs this, we could type this out and how to say it in the English phonetics. This is something that a new Muslim has to try to quickly learn, because these are pillars. Excuse me. In the prayer, to try to quickly learn how to say this, right? And then we have number 13, which are the two salams. So we have to say the two salams, saying assalamu alaikum to Allah, assalamu alaikum to Allah. And then the last one, and as I said, some scholars may order this or number this differently. We're just giving something to work with. We're doing it based on, by the way, a book which is called Bidayat al-Abid. If anybody wants to get that book, I'll show you next week. It's translated into English. That's where I'm basing most of the stuff here from the slides here by Sheikh John Starling from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And we'll show you his book next week if anybody wants to order that. And we have here sequence. And this is actually, the book is in Arabic and in English. He's translated the book. And the last one, which is a sequence. That has to be in order, right? We cannot, for example, do prostration before we did bowing. There has to be an order to it, right? You have to do that in the correct order. Right, to taslims, tartib. And why is that the case? Because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ always would pray his prayer in this exact order. And that's exactly the way he told the companion who he asked him, he requested for him to repeat his prayer. He told him, the way he told him was in an order. And that we conclude that from the language he used, which was thumma, which was and then do this. He didn't say and do this, he said and then thumma. So by that we'll conclude our lesson. I don't know if we have, let's see. Okay, next week we're going to get into the obligation. As I said, just to repeat, we've talked about now, we did the adhan, right? And then as far as the prayer itself, we're breaking up into 4 parts. And then we're going to just talk about it from A to Z. This is not A to Z. We're categorizing the things which are first, the pillars. Excuse me. We talked about before the prayer, which is the prerequisites, which in Arabic are called shurut. And now we're talking about the pillars, which, as we said, one who forgets them mistakenly, one who purposely does not do this in their prayer is not accepted. And then the one who, the next one we're getting to next week is the obligations. And so the pillars, if someone mistakenly misses it, their prayer is not accepted as well. But you have to go ahead and do that unit of prayer, that rak'ah over. And then next week, we're talking about obligations. And the difference between that one is that if someone, as we said, it shares with the other one, that if someone purposely misses it, their prayer is not accepted. But if they mistakenly miss it, then they can make it up with the sajda or the prostration of forgetfulness. Sajda to sahw, it's called in Arabic, right? And then we're talking about recommendations. So these 4 things, we're categorizing things, and then let's cover that, and we'll talk about everything from A to Z. So here we have, next week we're going to cover that, the obligation, the essentials, and those are 8. And that is all for now. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it from us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in knowledge. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us al-Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from us and accept it from you. And we're signing off here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello, are you there? Assalamu alaikum. I think Sister Nicola. Oh, she's there. She did.